Welcome to Capitol Preview, a weekly bipartisan discussion with Iowa legislators about the key issues facing our state. Brought to you by Mediacom.
Good morning and welcome to another episode of Capitol Preview. My name is Bill Peard. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Iowa Cable and Telecommunications Association. This program is brought to you by Mediacom Corporate Communications, and its purpose is to discuss issues that are important to Iowans up on Capitol Hill. We've talked to both representatives and senators. Our guest this morning is Representative Dustin Hite, District 79, who represents the cities of Oskaloosa and Pella. Well, good morning, Representative Hite.
Good morning, Bill.
We know that you're the Vice Chairman of the Judiciary Committee. What kind of things does that committee deal with?
So the Judiciary Committee deals with a whole host of issues, and so I like to analyze it similar to how my practice is back at home. I'm a lawyer back at home, and many of the things that we would deal with back in my law firm are kind of what the judiciary deals with. So, for example, we deal with most of the criminal laws that are passed. We deal with a lot of things dealing with civil lawsuits, family law, divorces, guardianships, conservatorships, estates. We also deal with anything that, any bills that adjust the judiciary system. So, for example, this past week, I've got a bill that talks about how the jury list pool is made up for the judicial system. So that's kind of what we do is a whole host of issues, a broad range of issues, but really things that have to do with the court system, the cases that are involved with the court system, those sorts of things.
Okay. Important committee, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The busiest policy committee, so the busiest committee outside of the Ways and Means or the Appropriations.
Very good. You recently managed a bill, SLAPP lawsuits. Can you tell me a little bit about what the SLAPP lawsuit is?
So SLAPP stands for a strategic lawsuit against public participation, and I think the best way to describe what that type of lawsuit is to tell you about a situation that occurred here in Iowa a few years ago. There was a local newspaper in western Iowa that was investigating a police officer who was having an inappropriate relationship with a young girl. And so that police officer ended up suing the newspaper with a libel suit, basically to attempt to keep them from publishing the story. Well, the police officer ended up resigning 2 days before the newspaper story was published, and the newspaper ultimately won their suit. But the downside to that is they had a $140,000 attorney fee bill, and that was a family-run newspaper, and it almost shut them down. And so what this bill does is simply allows at the beginning of a lawsuit, any lawsuit that implicates the First Amendment, the freedom of speech, allows the defendant, in this case the newspaper, to ask the court early on to dismiss the lawsuit because it really has no legs. And so hopefully it will discourage lawsuits like this one that are simply meant to keep the newspaper from publishing their story. It was a well-researched story. It was true. And so it passed with unanimous support out of the Iowa House. It was put together by our Attorney General's office and was modeled after a California law. It's really a great example of some of the bills that we pass here at the Iowa legislature. And it is also a great example of what we as Republicans are really trying to do. We're all about personal freedoms, freedom of speech, Second Amendment rights, those sorts of things. And this bill just goes right along with that. Similar to how our campus free speech bill that I managed last year on the floor is about, again, freedom of speech for Iowans.
Yeah, very important stuff. One of the priorities we've heard about in the House is broadband expansion. Can you tell me about those efforts?
Sure. So broadband is one of those things that it's absolutely critical in today's age. And if we do it right, the state of Iowa can be the leader of the nation. If we do it wrong, we'll be back in the pack, or worse, we'll be at the end. And so we are looking at addressing several of the issues that are causing us to not have connectivity in Iowa, and it's mostly rural Iowa. I mean, let's be honest, here in downtown Des Moines, connectivity is not really an issue. But it is an issue with a lot of our smaller towns and those people that don't live in town. And the causes of not having broadband are varied. And so our approach to it is varied. We take a very holistic approach to it. And so we've got a lot of different bills that deal with a lot of those issues, all the way from something that's quite simple in creating a broadband ready or a telecommuter ready program for communities. And what this would do would be allow communities to apply for these designations. They'd have to meet certain criteria. And then after that, businesses that are looking to relocate to Iowa, people that are looking to relocate to Iowa can look at that. And if we do it right, they will be able to say, this is the town that is ready, that it has the connection that we need as a business. So that's a simple thing. It gets into more complicated things. One of the issues that we have, a bill that just came through Ways and Means last week, has to deal with broadband grants. And so when we offer grants to companies to build out broadband infrastructure, we also tax those grants. And so we're handing out grants and then taking the money back. And so this is just something that says, well, we're not going to take the money back. When we give you $100,000, you're going to keep $100,000. Now, the feds still tax that, and we can't do anything about that. But from a state perspective,
Sure.
we can.
Oh.
So that's another simple bill that addresses that particular issue. We have other bills implementing a dig once policy. So when we put in new state highways, we put the conduit under the highways for future broadband expansion, so that 2 years down the road, we're not digging up and tearing up those brand new highways and just doing the whole thing again. We're looking at expanding broadband grants and addressing the ways in which those are judged, so that they are truly moving the needle on this. We're not investing in technology that's old, that's outdated, but really truly moving the needle and trying to make places as future-proof as possible. And then probably the biggest piece of legislation, and I don't know that we're going to get through it this year, but it's certainly something we're going to keep talking about, is opening up the ICN to commercial use. And so the ICN is a great asset that the state has that we've invested in over the past several years, several decades. And it goes to all of our schools, hospitals, court systems. You know, it's all throughout the state of Iowa. And so what we're looking at is being able to use that in a community that's underserved or that's unserved with broadband, and allowing a internet service provider to basically hook onto the ICN and then take it that last mile to the houses and stuff. The state of Iowa, we don't want to compete with local businesses, but we want to open those areas that just simply are not served.
Do you think, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Do you think the ICN is robust enough? I mean, it's how old? 40 years old. So do you think it's robust enough that it can do that? I mean,
so those are the conversations we've been having, and from what we're being told from the OCIO who runs the ICN, the answer to that is yes, because over the years we've invested in maintaining it and upgrading it. It will require some other upgrades, and again, we're not there to compete with businesses, but we would charge a fee, and that would help with those upgrades. But from what we're being told from the people that run the ICN, the answer is yes. It is. It is available and possible to use this infrastructure that we already have invested money in.
Good. Sounds like you're on your way, and I know it was a priority in the governor's state of the state in January.
Yeah, unfortunately with this topic, there's not a silver bullet that takes care of it all.
There isn't. It's pretty complicated.
Yeah.
Well, good job. Another big issue, and we've heard it over and over again this session, is childcare. What is the House working on in terms of childcare this year?
So yeah, one of the things that we hear back home that's part of the workforce issue that we have right now is the lack of childcare and the lack of affordable childcare. And so we've got a couple of things going on. We're hoping to help parents afford childcare, and so we're looking at doubling the income threshold for the child care tax credit from $45,000 to $90,000, which would help some of those families afford child care. We've got a couple of bills. Last week we ran 3 of them through Ways and Means that would incentivize employers to either expand their current child care offerings or add child care as one of the benefits for their employees. Mm-hmm. We also had a plan that would include child care workers in the high quality jobs arena, which would again offer some more tax incentives for those child care facilities to get workers and to pay them a good wage.
Well, that's important because that's a huge issue up there, child care. So.
It is, absolutely.
What's the status of the K-12 funding as it sits right now?
So, as you know, at the beginning of the session, we came up with 3 proposals: the House proposal, the Governor proposal, and the Senate's proposal. In the House, our total package was about $108 million new dollars for K through 12 education. Governor was around 100, and the Senate was a little bit less than that. And so we are currently working with the Senate and the Governor to try to come up with an agreement, but we did come up with an agreement on the transportation equity funding and the per pupil equity funding. And so that, I believe, was signed last week by the Governor, so that piece is in place. But right now we're in currently negotiations with the Senate and with the Governor's office to try to come up with that SSA number. We, of course, in the House are hoping we're closer to our number. We think that it's a responsible number, but it also shows the priority that we put on K through 12 education.
The Governor proposed, and we're coming up on the end of the show, but I do want to squeeze these last 2 questions in. The Governor proposed the Invest in Iowa Act earlier this session. What are your thoughts on that?
So the Invest in Iowa Act, as you know, has a lot of moving parts. The first part is raising the sales tax by a penny. Then you get into the tax part, which is kind of the part that I enjoy working on, by reducing Iowans' income taxes through accelerating the tax cuts that were passed in 2018, but also taking those tax cuts deeper. And then finally, the third big part of the Governor's bill is taking some of the tax burden off of property taxpayers, and then the state would take over some of that. And so right now I'm still looking into this and talking with constituents on what they view this legislation as. Because of all those moving parts, we have to look at, okay, what does this mean for mental health funding in our district, the regions that cover our district. And so as a caucus, we're talking about it. And when I go out, every public forum I mention to people is I want to hear what they have to say about this program. Because while we might like a certain part regarding natural resources conservation, we need to know what it does to mental health funding before that we can make a educated decision on the whole bill.
We're coming up on, we got about another minute. How is the state budget looking for the upcoming fiscal year?
So right now, things are looking really good. We've got healthy reserves, full healthy surpluses, full reserves, and so we're just kind of looking to be the same way that we have been in the past, be responsible, hopefully fund some of those priorities like rural hospitals, K through 12 education, community colleges, broadband that we talked about, child care, and maybe look at returning some of that money to Iowa taxpayers through the Taxpayer Relief Fund. So I think things are going really well now.
That kind of wraps up this session of Capitol Preview. You've done a great job of explaining some very complicated issues that you're facing up there at the State House, and you've done it well. So I'd like to say thanks again to Representative Dustin Hite, District 79 for the cities of Oskaloosa and Pella, and thanks for coming to visit with us this morning.
Thank you for having me, Bill.
Please stay tuned for another episode of Capitol Preview.